Poso, Sagoli, Sutton King, Naktau Pinuki, Nukyats, Ungwehe Ni'i, Wagneta Nawagita Lota, Onayota Aga Ni'i. Hello, my English name is Sutton King, and my Menominee name is Naktau Pianuki, and that means comes first woman in Menominee. I'm Afro-Indigenous of the Menominee and Oneida Nations of Wisconsin. And in my Oneida language, I shared that I am Turtle Clan of the Oneida Nation, Haudenosaunee, and people of the Standing Stone. I'm also Bear Clan of the Menominee Nation, and those are the people of the Wild Rice. I introduce myself in my language as an act of resistance towards colonialism, and as a way to reclaim the loss of language, land, and culture that has been stolen and extracted from our communities. Our ways of being and knowing, our culture, is our medicine. Culture is the medicine that has kept our people resilient. That medicine that allows me to stand here before you all today. As my ancestors, behind me and always alongside me, are survivors. Survivors of boarding school. My grandfather, Chief Oshkosh, pictured here, he was the first student to attend Carlisle Indian boarding school, where their mantra was kill the Indian, save the man. My ancestors are survivors of cultural destruction, catastrophic disease, forced relocation, warfare, violence, coupled with ongoing experiences of poverty and discrimination for generations. Today, I'd like to acknowledge that Horizons is situated on the island of Mannahatta, traditional lands of the Lenape, the Manhattan, the Canarsie, the Shinnecock, the Recalonk, the Munsee, and the Haudenosaunee. We pay respect to all of their ancestors, past, present, and future. Manhattan has always been a gathering place and trading place for many indigenous peoples, an intersectionality of many tribes since immemorial, a place to gather and sometimes safety during intertribal warfare. Today, let us offer our care and our gratitude to the land, the water, and the air as we gather here to discuss the future of psychedelics and plant medicines. As a granddaughter of the last chiefs of the Menominee people, my grandfather, Chief Oshkosh, walked in two worlds, ensuring that the Menominee people remained on our ancestral lands, connected to our life source, land, water, culture. Many indigenous tribes have been forcibly relocated. However, my grandfather understood the importance of culture, that culture being our medicine, and he slowly seeded our acres, really walking in these two worlds to ensure that today we are where our creation story started. I follow in his footsteps, balancing these two worlds. Sometimes I say, sometimes I feel like I have a high heel on one foot and a moccasin on the other, and how do you keep the balance? But I do feel like I have an MPH in one hand and my culture and my traditions in the other. You see me here jumping for joy. As I said, my name is Naktau Pianuki, means comes first woman, and I'm honored and grateful to have been able to accomplish many firsts in my family. The first to attain a master's. Thank you. Natives are born with the legal right to health care, the only group in the United States. This legal right is based on treaties which our tribes and nations were promised when our land and our natural resources were extracted and stolen from us. These treaties, seen as sacred bargains, promises have not been honored. Today, Indian Health Service, the lead federal agency tasked with ensuring that Native Americans here in the United States have access to health and wellness resources, is grossly underfunded at 50% of its capacity. Furthermore, for urban natives, 70% of us now live in urban areas. However, IHS only allocates 1 to 2% of their budget to urban areas. While we're here and we're reimagining and revising our mental health care delivery system, let's start by first honoring the sacred bargain, the treaties that we owe to indigenous peoples. As I shared, 70% of Native Americans now live in urban areas. As the co-founder and president of the Urban Indigenous Collective, founded an indigenous-led public health organization that is breaking ground on an intertribal mental health care clinic here in Lenape-Hoking. It's important that we understand how vital these culturally tailored resources are to our health. We're in a robust city like New York City, so-called. Why are we fighting for access to resources to not only survive, but to thrive? Sorry. Okay. I'm honored to serve as the Indigenous Program Officer for River Styx Foundation, working with a team that facilitates a relationship between the psychedelic space and indigenous traditional cultures and centers indigenous sovereignty and respect. I joined the Operations Committee of IMCF, the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund, to support its launch and scale, and support the Nagoya Protocol Collective Intelligence Training and Exchange. Boy, that's a mouthful, so we'll call it MPCITE. But before I get into that, I'd just like to kind of explain what the Nagoya Protocol is, what the Convention on Biological Diversity is, and really at the legal and political level, the international community has really set up with the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, agreed on in 1992 and entered in force in 1993, the year I was born, an international agreement to conserve biodiversity, a framework really for regulating the access of users to this type of resource and sharing, its monetary and non-monetary benefits, with its providers, including national states parties to the convention, as well as indigenous and local communities, having a record of preserving their knowledge about those resources. 196 national states have signed CBD, and despite the United States playing a significant role in its development, it has not yet ratified it. Surprise, surprise. In 2010, the Conference of Parties to the CBD agreed on the Nagoya Protocol, we've heard that a lot today, on access to genetic resource management. Now, Nagoya really covers traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources and was really created in response to the numerous biopiracy against indigenous peoples. Though the 130 parties are signing states to this protocol entered in force in 2014 and really have the freedom to interpret the Nagoya Protocol, the principles of the Nagoya Protocol have really been implemented with varying force and focus. And no surprise again, the US is not a signing state. The principles of the Nagoya Protocol are really useful and they're really powerful tools to really deal with this issues regarding ownership and management of the resources of our medicines. And at the intersection of the biological and cultural conservation with the economy and political institutions, the area covered by the Nagoya Protocol, 11 years after its design and 7 years after its entry into force. It's still not well understood by most players, despite many awareness-raising campaigns and training taking place. The understanding and the expertise is still scarce. The NPCITE is a multi-stakeholder process facilitated by Pierre Johnson, a social and ecological economist and world expert in bioprivacy and Nagoya Protocol, that analyzes and supports the governments where these medicines come from to implement frameworks that allow indigenous people to benefit from their rights under the Nagoya Protocol and biodiversity agreements. NPCITE will host 3 modules for each medicine that Miriam shared to you all, to really deepen the understanding of the legal and the ethical issues here at stake as it relates to the access to these natural resources, and as well as the related traditional knowledge and the sharing of its benefits. These modules will really facilitate a collective intelligence with a group of participants that bring knowledge of indigenous ownership, medicine, ecology, and ethical values. Now, NPCITE has 3 objectives. 1, educate the psychedelic medicine community on their responsibilities to adhere and implement biodiversity protocols within corporate strategy. Most importantly, translate these findings into accessible information for indigenous communities on the ground so that they know their rights, so that they feel empowered to hold organizations in the psychedelic space accountable to their rights surrounding access and benefit sharing. And last, encourage the adoption of these frameworks by local governing bodies. Call to action for the psychedelic community. That's you all. Now, River Styx and Bronner's is supporting this work to deepen their commitment to support the psychedelic space and being good allies. When we consider what it means to be an ally, I think of the principles that my ancestors, my community has taught me from a very young age. The 7th-generation principle, which I shared with you all on Thursday, which is based on my people's philosophy, the Haudenosaunee, which holds that the decisions that we make today should result in a sustainable future 7 generations in. I also think of kinship. Many of our communities have traditionally worked in these kinship societies, ensuring that all things, animate, inanimate, work in relation together to achieve harmony. Through this relational dynamic, people understood their responsibility and obligation to one another, to be good relatives. Through kinship, leaders ensured that everyone had what they needed and were provided for. Many of you feel kinship when you take plant medicine or psychedelics. We are at the time of the eagle and the condor. The eagle and the condor is an ancient prophecy which I'm sure many of you have heard that speaks of the Americas splitting into 2 paths, that of the eagle of the north and that of the condor of the south. The path of the condor can be seen as the path of the heart, the intuition, traditional ways of being and knowing. Whereas the condor can be seen as the eagle can be seen as the mind, the industrial, often seen as the Western lens. It was said that in 500 years, these paths would come together to achieve harmony and balance. Well, that time is now, my friends. As the Western world recognizes the validity of indigenous worldviews, knowledge, and perspectives, we have begun indigenizing. Indigenization requires non-indigenous people to be aware of indigenous worldviews and to respect that those worldviews are ways to be healthy or equal to other views. However, we have missed a step. The first step, decolonization, our responsibility to dismantle structures that perpetuate the status quo and address the unbalanced power dynamics. If we are going to create real change, I ask you, how are you being a good relative? How are you ensuring that indigenous communities who have suffered extraction and alienation at the hands of colonization are included in this movement in a way that not only respects, but upholds sovereignty? Yako.
So folks, we wanted to share one more thing. And this is, I think for the privileged and white allies that we all want to be, is it's really not easy to look at ourselves in the mirror sometimes. For me, that little girl who swore to a creek that I would never let anything harm it, and the agroecologist who has had to sit with grief and the hard work of realizing how hard it actually is to protect that creek. I think we need to, we've heard these words, but, as white allies really absorb what does it mean to stand with people who've lost their land, their sacred sites, their children, their language, their art, that have suffered broken treaties, their medicine, and get behind medicine sovereignty. It's essential that we do no harm to these communities as we work on our collective healing. We each actually have to look at ourselves about what the legacy of our impact will be. Will it be business as usual to overlook these communities in this time of collective healing? Will we want to extract medicine and experiences and knowledge without listening, respecting, honoring, and giving back? Will we engage when it is comfortable and looks good, or when we want something, but not actually build the structures and change our ways and practices to ensure that we do no harm, and in fact truly support, as we want to support, a mainstream health revolution? I just wanted to